Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Industrial Packaging Podcast with me, your host, Nathan Dube, Digital Marketing Specialist at Industrial Packaging. On today's show, we have Dave Crysler, Operations Consultant and Founder at the Crysler Club. Today, we're going to be discussing P&Ls, packaging, and operations consulting. Dave, welcome to the show.
Nathan, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here with you today.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, let's jump into the first question, which is, can you tell us a bit about your company and your role in the business?
Sure, happy to. Thanks. So I own and founded a operations consulting business. So we work with manufacturing business leaders to help them systemize their business and ultimately achieve operational excellence. So we talk about things like planning, people, process, and technology, how all of those things work hand in hand to be able to achieve the results that they're looking for within their business.
Awesome. So, where can people find you on the web?
Yeah, best place to find us is on our website, which is thechrysler.club. Or if you're a fan of LinkedIn, Twitter, those are big platforms. You can find us at the Chrysler Club, or you can find the Chrysler Club through me, Dave Chrysler, by searching any one of those platforms for my name and link up with us that way.
Awesome. Moving on to question three, we have you have spent quite some time working P&Ls for various companies. Can you tell us a bit about that? And before you do, can you give our listeners a definition of what P&L means?
Yeah, and great question. So P&L is profit and loss statement. And really, what that means is, when you have kind of full operational control of a manufacturing facility or something like that, often it's referred to as P&Ls, P&L responsibility, those types of things. So, I'll kind of give you the quick story, but I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. And so for me, I learned at a pretty young age what it was like to own and operate a business and kind of seeing how hard my parents would work at doing that and growing their business from, nothing to something. I kind of thought the answer was, well, hey, I could go work for a really large company. Surely they kind of have everything figured out. They know how to grow. They know how to, operate at a large scale. And that's what I found myself doing for the majority of my professional career. I worked for a large publicly traded company that grew through acquisition and spent nearly 20 years working with that company. So I was very fortunate that I got the ability to move around a couple of different times, have P&L responsibility for several different types of manufacturing facilities, including some print and packaging companies along the way. And it was really during that time that I kind of not only learn but flex the muscle of creating systems, engaging people, and how do we bring all of those things together to be able to again kind of deliver and achieve this operational efficiency. So how do we increase revenue, how do we increase profitability, and we do those things through the planning, people, process, and technology, leveraging all of those and making sure that we have a fully flushed, plan to kind of attack those two main goals. So, throughout my career, again, had a lot of opportunity. People, tremendous mentors along the way. People that saw, some ability in me to be able to execute on the plans that we had talked about to again ultimately get to the point that we were hitting our target goals for the corporation that I worked in. So, and kind of what took me beyond that. I think I mentioned to you that I actually purchased into a hand assembly business where we did a lot of intricate and custom packaging, and I did that for about a year and a half. and ultimately made the decision to start my consulting business because, again, I just enjoyed so much the ability to work with all types of different business owners and leadership teams in the manufacturing space. It's where all of my expertise and experience has been over the years. So I wanted to find a way that I could work with even more people and help give them these tools and the support needed to be able to not only grow their business, but engage their people and really move the needle for them.
That's fantastic. What a great story. And, based upon looking at your website, I can tell that you work with quite a few companies of various sizes. But as you mentioned, you used to own an assembling business where your laborers would hand assemble complicated packaging. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, that was it was a really fascinating business that I got involved in. I bought into an existing business, and the original founder of that business had been doing this type of work for 20 plus years, and found a niche that kind of sold into the print manufacturing space to support them because, as you can imagine, and with some of the stuff that you guys get involved with, in your business, there's a tremendous need for contract packaging and
Yeah.
the ability to sometimes take things that are so intricate and just need that hand touch. That's really where this company specialized in, things that were in some cases more quantity than you would ever think could be handled by hand. But it was, kind of the necessity of how the particular package or product was that we were putting together that ultimately required that hand assembly touch to it. So, yeah, I was a part of that business for about a year and a half, and we did a tremendous amount of really fun and really challenging projects during that time. But a tremendous group of people that we had there. A lot of working mothers. It was kind of this really perfect mix of people because, as you can imagine, sometimes that business would fluctuate in terms of, what was incoming. So we had this great group of people that worked with us. We allowed them to have flexible schedules, so it worked out really great for both of us. Mom had to drop her kids off at school, so she could start after that, and it was typically a shorter day, so she could still go and pick her kids up at school. And yeah, just a lot of tremendous people, a lot of fun we had in that business.
That's fascinating to me because what everyone seems to be talking about today to some extent or another is automation. But it's interesting to hear stories about complicated products in which you have to hand package them because you can't teach a machine how to do that. And I recently had a gentleman, Greg Berge, vice president of Pack Machinery, and we were talking about the key uh, items of consideration. And it really is, can you actually automate a process? So it sounds like your company and companies like yours at the time specialize in packaging these products, which kind of segues nicely into the next question, which are what are some of the products that you packaged during this time in your life?
Yeah, I mean, we had a wide variety, and kind of to your point, it's easy to think that there's things that can be automated about it. And I'll give you one example of something that you would think would be very easy to automate that ultimately became one of our more challenging projects that we took on, and that was lacrosse balls. So if you think about a lacrosse ball, if you're familiar, but substitute baseball, softball, not quite tennis
Yeah.
ball, those have their own packaging, right? But this client was looking to, package for retail. So that meant that, they were going to have basically a bin full of loose balls. And because they're sold as a one-off, they wanted to have, shrink film around it or something like that, shrink sleeve around it, and it needed a UPC code put on it. So again, kind of from the outside looking in, you'd think that'd be pretty simple to automate with the type of
Right.
shrink wrapping equipment and stuff that they have these days, right? Like the auto
Yeah.
infeed conveyors. And it was one of the most challenging projects that we took on because it was a ball. And so if you think about, what's the inside of a shrink tunnel look like? Well, it's typically got a conveyor belt in there, and on the sides of that conveyor belt is usually metal, right?
Right.
So as soon as
Yep.
that shrink film would touch that metal, it would end up bursting beyond the capacity of it. So um, you know, we went through all kinds of different trials and tests, and looked at different pieces of equipment for it, and ultimately we were able to kind of put an assembly line process together, where we were shrink wrapping these things by hand. So we were running them through kind of half of an automated system, and then taking we kind of figured out a little bit of uh, hard to describe over a podcast, but able to figure out a bit of a system to be able to just use a heat gun to kind of shrink it down perfectly. So we kind of went back to totally old school in terms of technology to be able to achieve a really quality finished product. And that was the most important because these things were going to be at retail. So, you couldn't have any burst seams. You had to make sure that the UPC label, looked good and was correct. So again, you kind of talk about, boy, this should be something super easy to automate. And, lo and behold, it was a real challenge to automate. So that's one example of something that you would think could be easily automated and wasn't. Another example, one of the other projects that we got involved in, which again, you don't put much thought to when you see these things kind of out in the wild. And this happened to be what I would call would be like a shelf talker, kind of like a pallet topper. So it was a retail display that was going to be used at Christmas time. And what they had was they wanted a floating ornament on the inside of a die cut shape. And so again, you'd kind of look at that and say, okay, how are we going to do this? And how do you do it with consistency? Because when you have, that negative space that you're trying to fill with something else, and in this case, a floating something
Yeah.
else, you had to make sure that, the kind of, they wanted it to be elastic banding. So, so again, another variable, right? Elastic expands. So when you're tying these knots, how do you make sure that that they stay consistent? So ultimately, when you put this thing together, you've got an ornament that's filling, centered in two directions, filling a void space. So that way, when it gets displayed in the store, it's eye catching. The wind kind of blows the dangling thing, the ornament in the middle. So
Right.
that's again just one small example of some of the kind of wild stuff that would come our way that we had to figure out. Not only how to make it look perfect, but replicate that time and time again. Because in both of those examples, you're talking about a significant quantity of individual items that needed to be put together.
Yeah, that's incredible. I can imagine those are both complicated items, which that was the next question, but you already covered it. What was the most complicated product to package? Do you know off the top of your head about how many laborers you were using? Because I imagine when you're doing large quantities like that and you can't automate the process, you need a pretty big team.
Yeah, we had anywhere between 15 and 20 people that would kind of handle the bulk of it. We did have some kind of contract folks that we could bring in, for some overflow work. But again, I go back to kind of the crew that we had because of who we went after from a labor pool standpoint. It was typically easy to find, people that were interested in, kind of coming aboard. It was right. It was indoors. It was kind of a great environment in terms of attracting people into the mix. So yeah, when we had some really big projects, we would have to go out and kind of drum up some additional people. But by and large, we were floating in that 15 to 20 person range for the majority of projects that we were doing.
Very cool. Well, thank you for that information. That brings us to the next question, which, on the flip side of things, what was the easiest product to package?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and again, while a lot of projects would seemingly be easy, there's always some sort of challenge with it. I can think of one of the projects that we had that was more of like a collating project, and that was for some vinyl transfer material. So if you can think about
Okay.
people that are doing like home crafts and stuff using those Cricut machines and things like that,
Yeah.
we had a significant project where we were actually putting those packs together. So kind of collating if it was a pack of multiple colors, we would do that. Some of them were kind of pre-designed or predetermined retail packs that we were creating. And so again, kind of on the surface, right, you'd think something super simple, right? Even potential of having that automated, and some of the things that made that particular project interesting and a little bit complex, even though again you kind of look at it from the surface and say, boy, this should be a really easy job. Making sure that the material that we're packaging, that it was consistent, right? So we kind of became another level of quality control for a lot of the clients that we would work with. So we were pointing out potentially flaws in the material, potentially color variations, size variations, those types of things. And then you'd have other considerations, right? Making sure that the outer kind of cover was the correct one that matched the description of what the actual material was. So things like that. Some of the other kind of, I wouldn't say easy stuff because again, everything typically had a challenge.
Right.
But we would do things like, apply Velcro to presentation folders and, assemble pocket folders and things like that. And some of those projects ended up kind of being a little bit more repetitious, a little bit easier to get more and more people trained on because it wasn't such a skill set. I mean, you still had the quality control component that was introduced into it. That was something that was really a kind of key selling point for us because everything was being touched by hand, so it was very easy to say, hey, does this look good, would I buy this, or is this something that potentially the customer would not consider acceptable quality. And so again, it was a nice feature and benefit for our clients to say, hey, we're already touching these things and we're going to let you know if there's a potential quality issue with any of them, and then you can make a determination on that side of things. So those were again a couple of additional examples of some things that you would think would be easy, but yet would still pose a challenge, and some stuff that really would fall into the repetitive, kind of not so challenging things to do.
Gotcha. That's all fantastic information. And I find this to be very interesting because working for a contract packaging company, I go to the warehouse to see what's going on and get blog ideas and whatnot. And I see some of our laborers on the line packaging items. And sometimes, it's straightforward, sometimes not so much. But it sounded like you had a really unique packaging business. But with that being said, let's move on to the next question. What was your favorite product to package when you owned your assembly business?
Yeah, there were a lot of really fun projects that we got to work on. And, as I was thinking about this, it's really anything that kind of flexes that creativity aspect. Like you mentioned, just walking out into the warehouse and seeing what you guys are doing. I would imagine that you guys come across projects that you kind of have to, have a collective meeting of the minds and put some ideas out there and maybe do some testing, and those were always
Yeah.
my favorite ones, like something that was not very simple and straightforward. I mean, we had one project that it was a perfect bound book, and the glue was failing. And what was really kind of wild about the glue failing in the spine, it's a particular type of glue that like never fails, right? So it's the project that should have never been a problem was now a problem, and ultimately it came down to a material compatibility issue. And so what was fun about that though was having to figure out, we did a bunch of experimentations. We ended up finding, a type of glue that we were able to reattach the covers and basically save this job. And while it cost a significant amount of money to be able to save it, it was significantly less than replacing the entire order. And so, that process of having to go through, experiment, talk to some of our suppliers from, kind of an adhesive standpoint and say, this is something that never should have been a problem. What do you think it is? What can we test out to try to, to fix it? Things like that were always exciting to me because it was like, man, how are we going to do this? There was another project that we did very similar in terms of it was a book publisher, and not only did we have to handle the kind of unpacking and repacking because these books were already packaged ready for distribution, so we had to handle
Yep.
that aspect of it, which was one aspect, but then we actually had to replace a page inside of this book.
Oh,
And
geez.
so talk about the skill set needed to be able to literally take an X-Acto blade, cut out that page with enough room left in the spine to be able to glue a new page in, and to kind of tip that in, and to do it in a fashion where nobody would really know. If you could imagine the amount of intricate work and kind of spotlight that we had on that, and we're talking about thousands of books, right? Not 50 books. That was thousands and thousands of books, that particular project. So there's been a lot of fun ones, but they all kind of go back to that same element of how do we repair something? How do we package it in a way that kind of flexes our creativity and say, how can we do this in the most cost effective way? Because that was the other component of it. If it needed to be done by hand because it was so many individual components coming together, that was one part, but we had to do it in a fashion that was also cost effective because you know most of these projects, like, there was still a budget constraint. So
Of
even though
course.
everything had to be touched by hand, you still had to figure out kind of the best way from an operation standpoint, from an assembly line standpoint, to be able to put these projects together.
Those are incredible stories. Probably two of my favorite that I've heard on the show thus far. I'm a huge bookworm, and in addition to buying a lot of paperbacks, I occasionally get a really nice hardbound book. I have a copy of Carl Jung's The Red Book, which is a giant 24 by 17 or so inch book. And when you get books like that, the bindings are an integral part to the presentation. So I can imagine the complexity of one, having the glue fail, having to replace it, and then the flip side. I mean, removing a page from a book and then putting a new one in so it looks as if it was part of the original binding. That's certainly a heroic feat. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. It was all the team. So, but yeah, a lot of fun to be a part of, and yeah, kind of any project that flex that muscle, like that. As you can imagine, working with people and seeing those things come together, super satisfying. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, we've talked a bit about your assembly business now, but you are currently an operations consultant. Can you tell us what a normal day in your current role at your company looks like?
Yeah, happy to. So as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, I get to spend the majority of my day talking to business leaders, business owners, and talking about some of the kind of day to day, as I like to call them, the everyday problems that people face within their business. And I really get to again kind of flex a lot of that creativity and brainstorming, kind of relying on my almost 25 years of experience now in operations, talking about those kind of day-to-day challenges, talking about how do we get out there and engage, empower people, how do we take advantage of that collective brain power that I like to call it, and take those ideas, take those things that people are doing, and leverage that to be able to give them the tools, right? That's really what it comes back to, is you're kind of getting out and empowering and engaging people so you can find out what their roadblocks are and ultimately implement process, implement technology that resolves those those roadblocks for them. So, the more that you can get out there and do those types of activities, kind of, the further faster that you'll ultimately be able to move in your business. And, for me, I mentioned I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So, I kind of grew up with this what I call the old school approach of, management and leadership. And when
Yep.
I was a young leader, right, I kind of took that into the work world, right? I took what I learned because that's how I learned to lead. And it wasn't until, I while I was, I say, while I was moderately successful, kind of doing it that way, where I thought I could kind of be everything and everyone, like, hey, I've got the idea. Hey, I can implement. Hey, we can, get this stuff accomplished. For me, it wasn't until I started to kind of make that shift of understanding how much faster you could go when you engage the people and talk about it. And then for me, when I was, I got an opportunity to move to a new plant. Well, I didn't necessarily know any of the people. I didn't necessarily know any of the equipment. I didn't necessarily know any of the products. So I really had to rely on, you know, the people that were existing to tell me, like, what's wrong with, our process, what's wrong with our technology, like, why is this stuff slowing you down, and then what do you think we could do to fix it? And so we got this really cool, back and forth approach, which is what I bring into the operations consulting business today. So it's really about giving those leadership teams, kind of helping them build that bridge, if you will, of all the stuff that's going on out on the shop floor with, the direction that they're trying to take things. I like to help them kind of build that bridge and be that conduit, because that used to be me. I used to be in that role, so I understand it very, very well. And getting the ability to talk to people, both on the leadership side and on the shop floor side, it's so much fun. And so that's where I spend the majority of my day is doing that, and trying to make new connections with leadership teams in the manufacturing space, and to continue having those conversations.
Well, that's fantastic. Again, another great story. And it sounds like what you do really has an impact on company culture, which is it hits close to home for me because here at Industrial Packaging, the type of teamwork that you talk about and trying to get everybody involved to look at a problem and find a solution collectively, that's really ingrained into our company culture. We have what we call a daily huddle. The entire team, everyone who works from home, such as myself, then with the people who work in the office and the warehouse, every morning we get together for 15 to 30 minutes and we go through, was there any safety violations? Was there any stucks? Meaning for us, that's, is it a problem that's happening? Are we not hitting our KPIs for some reason? And if that's the case, what does the team leader have to say about that? And then what can we do collectively as a group to help find solutions for that? So I really appreciate what you're doing out there with your company because it sounds like it really is about improving company culture and making processes better in that respect. So I think that's absolutely awesome. Um, we're coming up on the last question, though, which is how has global supply chains, sorry, how has global supply chain issues impacted your business?
Yeah, I will definitely answer that. I just wanted to make a comment on what you said internally with your company culture. I mean, it speaks a lot of volumes for any company that is going to make the investment of resources to do what you just described. So having a daily huddle, even for 15 minutes, even if it was 5 minutes, is light years ahead of what so many other companies out there are doing. And it's just so important from a leadership perspective to understand what that investment of resources can do for your company long term. So I love hearing that. And yes, absolutely. The stuff that we do with my company is all about impacting culture and ultimately impacting your profitability. So, that's something, that we say right on the website, because that's really how we're measuring things. You want people to be happy coming to the office. You want people to be happy to participate and share ideas, and people want to feel, like they're contributing. I mean, everybody talks about, well, the pay gap and those type. Yes, pay is important. You have to pay fair. You have to compensate people for the value that they bring. But the other side of that is people want to feel like they're contributing. They want to be heard. And the more that you can do that by, activities like your daily huddle, the more you can do that by management, by walking around. I mean, it's so much fun to see the light bulb go off with a leadership team or a business owner that starts to get it and then starts to see it implemented. So I wanted to make that comment quick, and happy to kind of answer your supply chain question as well. So
Well, before you do, I just want to say thank you for backing up. I do appreciate that. I probably should have gave you a little bit more breathing time, and that means a lot because we do put a lot of effort into our daily huddles and trying to find solutions to problems and become. One of our core values is we're a better business today than we were yesterday. So I appreciate you saying, "Oh, hold up, let's just chat about that again." So thank you for that. We can now move into the last question, which is, how is global supply chain issues impacting your business?
Yeah. So as far as our business specifically, it is not really impacted our business, but it has for sure impacted a lot of our clients' businesses. And it's a real challenge, as you well know. We have kind of the fortunate scenario where because we are not really involved in a lot of the supply chain, we get to avoid it, but we hear about it on, nearly an everyday basis. I mean, I was talking to a client last week that was explaining to me, they're in a print manufacturing space, and just explaining not only the challenges on raw material, paper, label stock side of things, but they are more of a digital shop, and was explaining some of the issues that they're having just getting toner for their equipment. And when you think about it, these things impact everybody, right? So in that specific scenario, you think about, okay, well, this particular printer is having a challenge getting their paper, having a challenge getting, kind of ink or toner, and then who else does that impact, right? If they're servicing, the local grocery store, or if they're servicing, a doctor, or dentist in the area, and you think about, well, what products are they producing that they can't get to? Is it mission critical stuff? And that's really the, kind of the scary part of what's happening with the supply chain issues, are the ripple effects, that I will call them. And you could kind of take any type of business and look at what those ripples are going to be, and potentially see, what's going to ultimately come back to the consumer as, price increases. I mean, you're already seeing some very significant price increases, at the grocery store, and, gas pump, and all kinds of other places. And unfortunately, I don't think that we're going to see the end of that anytime soon. So, yeah, while it doesn't necessarily impact us, directly, we have a lot of conversations about supply chain. And, I wish that there were some easier solutions in terms of, how do you address some of those challenges. But it's such a moving target, especially with some of the raw materials, that it really is a day to day, hour by hour, situation to monitor, and try to make the best decision with the information that you have. You no longer have the kind of comfort level of waiting until tomorrow to kind of make a decision, because especially if we're talking about, raw material, because potentially, if you wait, 4 hours, you could lose your ability to secure that raw material. I mean, I'm hearing just some really, really wild stories about, um, you know, uh, vendor securing a shipment, vendor confirming shipment, company follows up, and, vendor says, sorry, that, that raw material is no longer available. We've
Right.
allocated it to, somebody else. It's really some wild stuff.
It's interesting you bring up toner cartridges. I used to work for a copier vendor as a managed print services specialist, while simultaneously being the social media manager for the same company. But what's curious about that is our current general manager, one Mr. Michael Carpentier, he was the president at that company. So I'm quite familiar with the toner cartridge industry. And Yeah, I've heard a lot of the same things going on. And you talk about ripple effects in the supply chain. And as much as what's going on in the world it really is a total bummer. It's helped me to understand how integrated everything from, the food you buy at the supermarket to the gas that you get at the gas station to every product that comes into your life. It is such a complicated system that is in place. And when we're seeing supply chain disruptions like the war in Ukraine, the container ship debacle that kind of came as a byproduct of the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course, set back companies for months on end. It really is a lot to go through. And I think the fact that you took the time to empathize with that fact, while you don't have, issues with your company itself, a lot of your clients do. And I'm sure that must be very endearing for your clients. So it sounds like not only do you run a tight ship, but you really do care about your people. And I think that's ultimately the biggest thing at the end of the day is empathizing with and caring for your customers as human beings. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, for me, I'm a very people centric person. I wasn't. I would say I wasn't always that way. It was something that I had to learn and to be able to understand the power of it. And but if you go to my LinkedIn profile, you'll see one of my favorite quotes by W. Edwards Deming, which is a bad system will beat a good person any day. And it really speaks to the ability to not only empathize with people and understand that there's all kinds of situations going on outside of the office that ultimately impact things going on in the office, but just the fact that taking that and leveraging that will help you build a system that ultimately solves that problem. And that's really how I try to attack every problem. It's so easy to blame people because people are the ones executing the systems, right? But at the end of the day, when you really start to peel back that onion, what you find is that you have system failures, you have equipment failures, you have system failures. And to me, the only kind of real people failure is that we have not implemented a system to help the people execute a particular series of processes. So I appreciate you saying that. And this has been so much fun, Nathan. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Absolutely a pleasure. I will be sure to invite you back sometime in the future. But with that being said, that was the last question. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been a real blast and great conversation. So look forward to coming back. Happy to do that anytime.
Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for another episode of the Industrial Packaging Podcast with me, your host, Nathan Dube, Digital Marketing Specialist at Industrial Packaging. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you will come back for the next one. But until then, I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.